Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is our first webinar from the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom. The Everett Center is a new initiative of Dallas Baptist University. The university was founded in 1898 and proudly upholds the long Baptist tradition of supporting religious freedom for all. The Everett Center operates on campus in Texas, and we also have an office here in Washington, D.C., where I am located. Our distributed approach is an outgrowth of our mission. The center exists to inspire and equip students, churches, and policymakers to advance religious freedom for all. So to educate students, churches, and policymakers, we will hold periodic webinars like this on key challenges. We selected Ukraine as today's focus because it exemplifies how a nation can create space for religious freedom after authoritarian rule, and also currently suffers the most severe religious persecution in Europe due to Russia's illegal invasion. June, this month, marked two anniversaries that demonstrate this duality. First, just yesterday on Sunday, it marked the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's constitution and its strong protections for religious freedom. Article 35 of the Constitution states, quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of personal philosophy and religion. This right includes the freedom to profess or not to profess any religion, to perform alone or collectively and unimpededly religious rites and ceremonial rituals, and to conduct religious activity." It also continues, quote, "The church and religious organizations in Ukraine are separate from the state. No religion shall be recognized by the state as mandatory," end quote. So these constitutional protections over the last 3 decades have guided and benefited the country, placing it in stark contrast to Russia, which persistently limits its citizens' religious freedoms. Ukraine distinguishes itself from Russia and most of the 15 states that emerged from the former Soviet Union. USERV has at some point recommended every country except Ukraine, the 3 EU member Baltic states, and Armenia for designation as either a CPC or special watch list country. Now, certainly, no country achieves perfection. Many have voiced concerns when Ukraine passed legislation in 2024 to ban religious organizations connected to the Russian Orthodox Church after the completion of a legal review. So we want to help Ukraine navigate how to protect religious freedom in a time of war. So any criticisms that come up today are intended to be constructive from friends. But overall, we need to keep in mind Ukraine's place in the overall region that's very good, and Ukraine's remarkable story guided by its 30-year-old constitution. Now, the second anniversary in June is more worrisome. Russia bombed the 150th religious site in the country. This number comes from UNESCO, which has been tracking the destruction of Ukrainian heritage sites since the onset of the invasion. Now, Ukrainian observers have recorded Russia hitting many more religious sites, but the UNESCO number was further evidence of the dire situation facing religious freedom in Ukraine and the evidence of war crimes by Putin's forces. The recent bombings of the historic monastery in Kyiv was case in point. Now, the situation is even worse in occupied eastern Ukraine, with consistent reports of non-Russian Orthodox pastors being arrested, some disappeared, and churches closed, if not destroyed. Putin's war has caused untold suffering, which we must continue to highlight. So we're convening this webinar today to understand Ukraine's positive example and current challenges. We will become better informed about the situation, but also hope to hear ideas for how people of good faith can respond and support Ukraine. So we'll first hear from Dmytro Vok, a visiting professor of law at the Cardozo School of Law, about Ukraine's constitutional protections of religious freedom. Following will be Maxim Vasin, the executive director of the Institute for Religious Freedom, who will share their research on the bombing of Ukrainian religious sites by Russia. Next will be Sarah Macon, a former U.S. government official and a former colleague of mine. We were both in government, and an advisor on the documentary A Faith Under Fire, who will share about that work. And lastly, we'll hear from two Ukrainian pastors, Bishop Babachuk and then Pastor Bertson, who will share about Russian persecution in the East. So with that, again, thank you for coming. Thank you for our interpreters for helping make this possible. And with that, let me turn it over to Dimitro for his comments about the legal situation in Ukraine.
Thank you, Knox. Thank you for having me. As Knox mentioned, Ukraine has always had a reputation of religious freedom champion in the region, and I would say that there are three basic explanations of this sort of reputation and this sort of reality in Ukraine. First, from the legal side, actually the story started with the religious law in 2021, and the law has never been significantly changed and more or less remains as an example of very liberal religious legislation. We don't have mandatory registration for religious communities. The government we have very little practice when the government use registration as a sort of barrier for religious communities to enter religious market. We don't have significant limitations on unregistered religious activities. More or less, people can practice, in contrast to many other post-Soviet space, people can practice their religion without having any registration if they don't want to have it. We don't have specific legislation targeting religious, specific so-called anti-extremist laws targeting religious communities, usually minorities, and so on. Plus, in 1996, the Ukrainian constitution was adopted, and it's an example of religiously neutral constitution. Article 35 that Knox read for us, from the textual point of view, in American terms, includes both free exercise clause, a sort of very broad protection for religious exercise, limited only where specific important societal goals, such as public order or rights of others, requires this. And we also have what is in the American constitutional law called establishment clause. So the Constitution prohibits the interference of religion into the government and separates religion from public education. Yes, we have the reference to God in the preamble of the Constitution, but it's more a kind of symbolic rather than any sort of normative. From the political side, Ukraine has always been a democracy, and the government has never been strong enough to consolidate the religious market, to impose the total control over religious markets. We probably tried a couple of times, but it didn't work out at all. And from the religious side, Ukraine possesses, in particular because of such a liberal legislation, possesses real religious pluralism, including the split within the Church of Majority, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We have two big Orthodox churches competing each other, and that provides some space for religious minorities to enjoy their right. So in this sense, Ukraine provides a very rare case, even if you compare with other states, post-Soviet states, where the situation is religious freedom is okay. Ukraine provides a rare situation of religiously neutral legislation, a sort of framework that more or less friendly to both to the religion of majority, but also to religious minorities. The war with Russia started in 2014 has brought up several challenges and changes in the legal regulation of religion. Obviously, the biggest challenge is what's going on in the occupied territories, and I will omit them because I understand that next presentations will do that, but also because it's more an issue of the imposition of Russian framework of religion-state relations on the occupied territories, and sometimes like blatant violence rather than Ukraine's religion-state relations. So when it comes to the territories under Ukraine's control, I'll point out two challenges and one change that I think is significant. The first challenge is conscientious objectors' rights. There are religious communities in Ukraine with strong anti-war theology and doctrines, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, several Protestant communities, Krishnas, and so on. And for them, it has been a problem since 2014 14 to get exempt from the military service. Ukraine's constitution limits alternative service to those with religious conscientious objection to serve in the military. The legislative framework is more restrictive. It guarantees the right to alternative service only in peacetime, and only for those who not only hold pacifist beliefs but also belong to religious organizations whose teachings prohibit the bearing of arms and are recognized as such by the government. So in order to get an exemption even in peacetime, you have to belong to a certain community like Jehovah's Witness, and you also have to possess individual pacifist views based on your religious conviction. And what is more important is that alternative service, civilian service, is not available for those mobilized under martial law. So for those who were mobilized since 2022, alternative service is not available. Ukraine's mobilization law does not provide for those mobilized to opt for alternative service. This has completely prohibited the right to alternative service, whether inside or outside the military, as I said since the beginning of the invasion. This contradicts to international law, which allows for a more restrictive approach to the alternative service in times of the war. For example, the government can elevate scrutiny over whether that or this believer really belong to a certain community, really possess those views. But the international law does not allow for full sort of cancellation of alternative service. And what is also interesting that at the same time, the Ukrainian legislature provides an exemption for priests and religious leaders. So if you are a priest or if you run a religious community as a leader or a pastor, you can be exempt, even though your community might not have an anti-military doctrine. But if you are an individual believer and you don't have those, and you do have pacifist beliefs, you will not be exempt. The second challenge is the law dealing with religious communities affiliated with Russia. In 2024, the Ukrainian parliament adopted a law prohibiting the Russian Orthodox Church and requiring religious communities affiliated with the Russian Church to sever these ties under the threat of the ban. The main target of the law is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, historically and ecclesiastically affiliated with the Moscow Patriarchate. The church did some steps to separate themselves from the Russian Church and adopted a new charter, for example, eliminating certain provisions allowing for the Moscow Patriarch to influence its internal life. But the government is not satisfied with this and more or less requires the church to proclaim its canonical independence from the Moscow Patriarchate, which the church seems doesn't want to do. From the religious freedom perspective, the biggest problem is that the government is trying to regulate internal religious life and ecclesiastical connections as a matter of church doctrine. According to the law, the Ukrainian government does not have to prove that there is any administrative subordination, there is any, or that the Ukrainian church is directed by the Russian church. It's enough to determine that there is a certain ecclesiastical link to start the liquidation process. So far, the government initiated a court case demanding to ban the top body of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is Kiev Metropolis, and if it's banned, every other part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church can be also deregistered. And finally, one important change is in 2024, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced that Ukraine would transition to a more cooperative model of religion-state relations. We don't know yet what it means. So far, the government promised to simplify religious access to state-owned religious property and the exemption from the mobilization for priests, which, as I said, already a reality. But religions, and first of all, Christian churches in Ukraine, has articulated a much more ambitious program of cooperation, which includes the access to public funding, the right to officiate marriages, issues of family and sexuality, the access to public education, restitution of church property, which didn't happen, and probably to some extent even impossible in Ukraine, and so on. And this is a situation in progress, and this is one of the consequences of the war. In a way, it depends on Ukrainian president because Ukrainian religion-state relations system is very personalized. But we are sure that more or less Ukraine is departing from this previous religiously neutral model to this model where the government is significantly closer to religion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmytro, for that great overview of the current legal environment, some of the challenges and issues in this very dynamic situation. Next, I want to turn to Maxim Vasin. who's the executive director of the Institute for Religious Freedom in Ukraine. They've done just consistently excellent reporting on the different challenges in Ukraine, the different dynamics going on in the country that Dimitro spoke about, but also monitoring what's happening in the East and tracking very specifically the number of religious sites that have been bombed by Russia, which when I was at the State Department was an incredible, it was incredible to have a resource like them available when rely upon. So I'm very happy that Maxim is joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Maxim, for your presentation.
Thank you, Knox, for introduction and for invitation. And it's my pleasure to be here. And I want to share some um, thoughts briefly, because for 12 years since 2014, the Kyiv-based Institute for Religious Freedom has documented Russian war crimes in Ukraine, and we published numerous of reports. And according our monitoring, already in the first years of Russian aggression, many religious buildings of various denominations in Ukraine, primarily in the Donetsk and Luhansk region, were destroyed as a result of hostilities or deliberately seized and looted by Russian forces. However, the situation deteriorated significantly in February, since February 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So I will share the main findings of our research from recent years. Um, if I can, I share my charts from our report published in 2024, and you can see geography of destroyed religious buildings and sacred places damaged by shelling or looting because of Russians' full-scale invasion. And um, the number of destroyed churches, houses of prayer, mosques, and synagogues is much higher and has already reached at least 740 affected religious sites, as President Volodymyr Zelensky mentioned yesterday in his speech. This data is corroborated by the findings of the Religion on Fire project. In addition, monitoring conducted by our Institute for Religious Freedom has documented the annual increase in the destruction of religious infrastructure. The number of destroyed churches in Ukraine continues to grow each month. At least 120 religious buildings sustained severe damage, and another 70 were completely destroyed, making it impossible to use them. It's worth noting that churches of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has historically and canonically been affiliated with the Moscow Patriarchate, have suffered the most, with at least 200 damaged. This disaster for the Church refutes Russian propaganda, which claimed that Russia invaded Ukraine to protect the Orthodox Church. In reality, Russia itself poses the greatest threat to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. You can see uh, some dynamics on the second chart. Um, why are so many religious buildings in Ukraine suffering during the ongoing war? Is this accidental or intentional? The answer is both. Clearly, a significant number of them have become accidental targets during active combat in cities and villages along the front line or in border regions. For example, most religious buildings in the key region were destroyed or damaged because of the Russian ground assault in February and March 2022 when Russian troops attempted to capture Ukraine's capital, Kiev. However, there are dozens of documented cases in which Russia has deliberately destroyed Ukrainian churches during ground assaults or and ongoing air attacks. A telling example occurred 2 weeks ago, as Knox mentioned, when a Russian drone deliberately struck the Armenian Cathedral of the Kiev Pechersk Lavra, which is both an active monastery and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There is not and never has been any military facility near this Orthodox shrine. As another example, in 2022, all the buildings of the European Biblical Seminary founded by the Baptist Church were destroyed as a result of deliberate shelling by Russian forces in the Kiev region. In addition, the growing scale of destruction of Ukraine's religious infrastructure has been influenced by the tactics of Russian troops, who seize houses of worship and convert them into military bases or firing positions. Russian units have often placed battle tanks and artillery systems directly next to churches to avoid return fire or to create a pretext for accusing the Ukrainian government of shelling civilian sites. For example, the complex of buildings of the Taurisky Christian Institute in Kherson was damaged by shelling after Russian troops turned it into their stronghold. The Institute for Religious Freedom has also documented testimonies and evidence of deliberate vandalism by Russian soldiers against Ukrainian churches in various religious regions of the country. For example, in the first 2 weeks of the full-scale invasion, they intentionally fired automatic weapons inside the Catholic seminary in Warsaw, the Kiev region. In the occupied Ukrainian territories, the Russian authorities widely practice cutting crosses of the buildings of evangelical churches, which are then repurposed as offices for security agencies or other Russian governing bodies. I will show another slide with data on the denominations suffered the most from the destruction of religious sites, and now these numbers are even higher. So, why is Russia destroying Ukraine's spiritual heritage while pretending to be a nation rooted in Christian values? The deliberate destruction by the Russian army of Ukrainian religious shrines, historic monuments, museums, and other significant cultural sites shows that Russia's invasion is driven not only by the geopolitical ambitions of President Vladimir Putin and Russian leadership, but also by a strong ideological foundation rooted in the neo-imperialist concept of the Russian world, Ruski Mir. Russia is waging this war primarily not for territory, of which it already has plenty without Ukraine, but to destroy Ukrainian identity, history, language, and religious pluralism. In the worldview of the Russian leadership and promoters of the Russian world concept, there is no place either for Ukraine as sovereign state or for Ukrainian people as a nation. Thus, Russian society is driven by hatred toward Ukraine. So, in conclusion, I can say that systematic Russian attacks on Ukraine's religious infrastructure not only deprive tens of thousands of believers of the opportunity to worship together, receive spiritual care, and access humanitarian assistance, but also bear the hallmarks of the crime of genocide against the Ukrainian people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Maxim, for that comprehensive overview. And those charts, I think, really help us see the scope of the attacks and the number of places that have been struck, both Christian, and I think it's also important non-Christian. Mosques and synagogues have also been targeted by Russian forces. Now I want to turn to my former colleague and friend, Sarah Macon. We worked together in the first Trump administration. I was at the State Department. And, so much of the innovative things we were able to do was because of really the support of Vice President Pence, his personal interest in that. And so much of what Vice President Pence pushed for was because Sarah Macon was working for him. So I give Sarah a lot of credit for the remarkable accomplishments that occurred during the first administration. And now she's a part of this documentary called A Faith Under Fire, or sorry, A Faith Under Siege. And before I turn to Sarah, let me play the trailer from it. It's about 2.5 minutes long, and it'll also allow us to see the conditions on the ground in these places we've talked about. If I can figure out how to share my screen. I always struggle with this part. Share. There we go.
Knox, if there's a way you can pause it and try to get audio, I think we're not hearing audio.
Ah, that's not great. I hear it in my headphones, but I'm not sure why you're not hearing it. I think unfortunately we'll just have to show it and encourage people to go to the website to hear it. So we'll finish the video. Sorry about this. Great. I'll drop into the chat the link so people can get to the website. And Sarah, Thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Knox. And I'm so glad you all had the opportunity to see that. Knox said he'll put that in the chat, but you can find our trailer, our full film, all of the short documentary films we've done, which I'll talk about briefly, at faithundersiege.com. So we'll put that in the chat. Make sure to check that out. But listening to the previous speakers, I can't help but think about how this week is America's 250th anniversary. And Ukraine, is new, 30 years. And neither of us are perfect by any means. But as a believer, I think it's vital that we speak the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15 tells us, instead speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every aspect the mature body of him who is the head, and that is Christ. There are 300 million Christians in the occupied region, and Russia is exporting the religious intolerance that they demonstrate within their own borders, their Russian borders, to Ukraine. And this is not just Ukraine's fight. It's a global assault on biblical faith. And this film has documented firsthand what the media won't, and that Russia is waging a hidden war on the Christians and people of faith in occupied Ukraine. In Russian occupied territories, religious liberty does not exist, as you've heard from other speakers. Vladimir Putin has shut down every church that he doesn't fully control. Over 700 churches have been looted, shelled, or destroyed. At least, and this is a conservative estimate, 54 faith leaders, pastors, priests, others have been murdered. Dozens more have been starved, beaten, tortured in Russian prison camps simply for leading Bible studies at home. As you've heard from other speakers, this isn't new. Russia has been persecuting religious communities within their own borders for many years. And the State Department, I believe Knox mentioned this at the beginning, State Department years ago designated Russia as a country of particular concern for some of these reasons. Ukrainian believers who have survived Soviet persecution say that this is worse now because Russia is weaponizing the Russian Orthodox Church as a tool of the Kremlin. And the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church has declared this a holy war on Ukraine and the West. The targets for the Russians are evangelicals, Protestants, Baptists, Catholics, anyone not loyal to Putin's orthodoxy. And one of the things you'll see in the film that we really wanted to document was that, as Christians, as a Christian myself, we have one leader, and that one leader is Jesus Christ. And so, yes, we are called to, respect the state and our leaders. But in this case, right, Putin is pressing on these people, and sorry if you hear my toddler in the background yelling, that's who that is. And so we really tried to get that message across in the film. We have a lot of stories of people who are persecuted themselves, who lost family, or who are sharing stories of other pastors, priests, other faith leaders that they have watched be killed or persecuted. I mentioned we have some shorts as well. Those are all on our website. We document very specifically what has happened to the Catholic Church inside the Russian occupied territories. There are no Catholic priests left in the occupied territories. And we have a specific short that goes into the details of how the Catholic Church has been cleaned out in that region. We also cover what has the sort of pressure that's been put on the Jewish community in Russian occupied Ukraine, as well as the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We go into some of the detail on that. So I would encourage you not just to watch the full film, which is 60 minutes, but some of those shorts as well. And I think the last point I'd like to make is just, it's something that we haven't really covered yet, is why we're hearing what we're hearing. And it's a propaganda trap. Russia is lying to Americans. And we need to stop the Russian lie and war machine. The Russian-funded lobbyists and disinformation campaign is very powerful, and it's very well funded. Estimates are anywhere from $2 to $3 billion a year that floods into American circles, and you hear that on TV, on radio, all over the place, falsely claiming, right, that Ukraine persecutes Christians. And the truth is the opposite, as you've heard from us already many times today. A free Ukraine protects evangelicals and Catholics and Jews and the Orthodox believers side by side, and Muslims, all of them, right? Faith Under Siege exposes the videos, the security footage, the survivor testimony that the Kremlin wants buried, and that the Kremlin uses billions of dollars a year to keep buried. And I think, I believe in my heart, it is of the utmost importance that we reject the foreign disinformation campaign, that we stand up for Ukraine's Christians. Standing for religious freedom is one of the same principles that built this beautiful country 250 years ago. And as believers, we're called to speak that truth and encourage others to do the same. And one last point. During all of this, what we have seen is that faith is not dying in Ukraine. It's in fact exploding under this fire. Despite the horror, Ukrainian Christians are experiencing a revival. We have numerous stories that have shown this, but a Russian drone strike was aimed at killing 20 evangelical pastors in Kyiv, and it backfired. It sparked a spiritual awakening. The pastors and believers showed up the next day, and they worshiped, and they claimed, we report only to God. And so it's been beautiful to witness that as well. So I just want to encourage you all that this matters to us as Americans, especially as believers, and some of the things you can do. You can watch the film, share the film. We encourage people to share this in small groups or play the trailer at church, encourage people to watch it. Again, I don't think I said this at the beginning. I should have. This film was made by a believer. He is, we don't get any sort of money from Ukraine or anybody like that. There's a gentleman from Colorado who's a Christian who was called, he felt called to go to Ukraine after being invited, and he's got a family and a life and didn't really want to go to a war zone, but he responded to the Holy Spirit and he went. And what he witnessed there, beyond what he'd already seen and heard on the news, was this persecution of the church. And he decided he wanted to do something about it. And he got creative with his wife, and they hired a film team, and they put together this incredibly well-made documentary. And so that's where this even came from. And so we encourage you to share it, to watch with with your friends, small groups at church, share it on social media, however you can. And we can provide, we have small group learning materials. We have one-pagers, anything you might need in order to sort of have a conversation about this. We're happy to share. And again, I think around the 250th birthday of the United States is a great time to remind people about the importance of religious liberty, how it is fundamental to us in America, and how it needs to be fundamental to people around the world. And we would just also encourage you, go to the website. We're always trying to speak to Congress and to the administration that any peace deal must include religious freedom protections, the return of tens of thousands of kidnapped children, which is a whole other topic and subject maybe for another webinar, and exiled clergy, and accountability for the persecution that Russia has been perpetrating. And so we've got a letter on our website. We encourage you to go and check that out. But we have got to continue to defend the persecuted church and believers of all faiths. And we need to lead. That's what Christ calls us to do. So thank you for the time, Knox. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. And I thank you for your kind words at the beginning about my work. I have been tremendously blessed that the Lord has given me gifts and then put me in roles where I can use those. And I'm grateful for that time and grateful to still be able to work on these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And if you could put the link to that letter in the chat, I think everyone would benefit from seeing that.
Absolutely.
And this notion of understanding the truth and the fog of war and disinformation and misinformation from Russia and its allies, I think is it's important that we see and hear about what's happening from a firsthand perspective. So we're very fortunate to have two voices from Ukraine. First, we're going to hear from Bishop Babachuk, and then followed by Pastor Beertson. I apologize if I'm sure I mispronounced those names, but they are both two respected men of faith who have seen firsthand the devastation of these attacks and the impact on real people and the impact on the church. So we'd ask to hear from both of you for 5 to 7 minutes each, which is not enough time, but to give us a sense of what's happening on the ground. So over to you, Bishop.
Найперше, я щиро вдячний за можливість мати слово. Я зараз знаходжуся в місті Херсоні, це південь України. В служінні церковному я із 1993 року, тому маю досвід достатньо гарного часу, коли дійсно в Україні ми мали волю, вільність для віросповідання, організовувалися нові церкви, будувалися храми, дома молитви. У 2014 році, коли була звершена анексія Криму, ми відчули перші признаки, так скажемо, російської експансії. Більшість переживали церкви в Криму, але ми були дуже тісно пов'язані через наше служіння, тому ми не тільки були свідками, але також приймали участь в деяких діях по збереженню наших місіонерів, які знаходилися від Херсонщини в Криму, які працювали там, які будували там церкви. І коли прийшла Росія, коли відбулася анексія, вони змушені були. Так.
Translators were not hearing any English on the English channel.
Зараз в нас достатньо потужний обстріл іде в Херсоні.
Олександре, хвилинку, да.
В нас зараз обстріл в Херсоні, тому може пропасти інтернет або світло, тому вибачайте.
I can hear you, so that's...
Okay.
So I can hear an interpreter in my ear. Are you on the English channel?
Олександр, давайте спробуємо ще раз українською. Вони говорять, що чують переклад англійською на своєму каналі.
Yes, that would be great. Or if you could summarize what he said, and then, if that's possible, or he can start over.
Дякую за можливість поділитися інформацією про ситуацію на півдні України. Добре, все чути мене? Дайте якийсь знак. Бачу, дякую. Я вже сказав, що я в служінні із 1993 року. І основне моє служіння – це південь України, Херсон. Пасторське служіння, а також і керівник об'єднання церков євангельського спрямування. Добре переживали моменти, коли мали спокійний час до воєнний час. Дійсно підтверджуємо, що Україна, вона забезпечувала вільність і свободу для віросповідання, не було обмежень якихось відносно створення нових громад чи побудови церковних будівель. Але, на жаль, коли відбулася анексія Крима, ми відчули перші такі дзвоночки, коли наші друзі, місіонери і служителі, які з Херсонщини працювали в Криму, змушені були просто залишити Крим, тому що була загроза їхнього арешту. Так як вони всі були кваліфіковані як майже американська розвідка. Хоча майже всі не мали ніякого відношення до військових справ, були просто місіонерами, були благовісниками, євангелистами, свідчили про Господа. Наступний досвід – це повномасштабне вторгнення. Безумовно, що коли російська армія наступала на Херсонщину, на південь України, то під обстріли, під снаряди попадали різні будівлі, включаючи і церковні будівлі. Я знаходився під окупацією майже 9 місяців в Херсоні, тому мали такий гіркий досвід спілкування із службами ФСБ. І одна із головних цілей, яку переслідували ФСБшники, щоб люди, які мають якусь вагу, священники, пастори, стали рупорами їхньої ідеології. Особисто моя родина пережила складний час, тому що взяли у полон одного із наших синів, і потім офіцери ФСБ, вони чітко сказали, коли ви будете співпрацювати з нами, ви його отримаєте. Якщо ви не будете співпрацювати, він отримає достатньо великий термін, 24 роки, 25 років ув'язнення. І це був складний час, це було декілька місяців такої боротьби. З одного боку ми відстоювали те, що він не зробив жодних порушень, і тримання під вартою – це було просто знущання із моєї позиції. Я хочу засвідчити, що дуже багато друзів допомагали в тому, щоб ця історія завершилась позитивно. Я скажу, що це було дійсно таке втручання Боже, тому що Бог зберіг від всяких співпраць, від всякої роботи спільної, але тиск був шалений. І це не був тиск тільки на мене, тому що я знаю, що були і православні священники арештовані, були інші служителі, священники, які не встигли виїхати, тому що окупація Херсону відбулася дуже швидко. Якщо перший, другий день ти не виїхав, то в третій день ти вже не міг виїхати, тому що місто було оточене. Під час окупації дуже прикро руйнація не просто будівель, це само по собі несе біль, але конфіскація, тоді, коли будівля відповідала якимось їхнім інтересам, більшість наших будівель, вони мали такі цокольні поверхи, як підвал, не зовсім підвал, це такий як перший поверх, який частково знаходиться у землі. І коли вони приходили, наприклад, прийшли до нашої церкви, почали стукати, нібито прийшли, сказали, що тут ховаються партизани, але ми бачимо, як вони прикладами стукають по стіні. І потім вони кажуть, який матеріал, з чого стіни. Ми кажемо, бетонні стіни, бетонні блоки. І це їм дуже подобалось. Вони між собою переглядалися і казали, окей, добре. Тобто частина домів молитви були конфісковані під військові цілі. До сих пір деякі дома молитви з такими цокольними поверхами на окупованій території на лівому березі.
We've been able to hear, yes, Pastor. And if he can start to wrap up, then we can hear from Pastor Beardson.
Да, дуже дякую за можливість сказати про це. І є будинки, які належали церквам. Сьогодні вони ще є як в використанні на лівому березі Херсонщини, як військові цілі. Там знаходяться, росіяни використовують їх як якісь укриття. Продовжуються обстріли. В нас навіть вчора на Херсонщині на правому березі через дронів був зруйнований дім молитви. Це північ Херсонщини, Високопільщина. Зараз дуже велика небезпека від дронів. Дрони зараз руйнують, атакують дома молитви, але люди продовжують збиратися. Достатньо багато людей приходять, які раніше не ходили до церкви, і шукають просто такої душевної, моральної підтримки. Віримо, що Господь допоможе нам пройти цей час, і ми будемо мати перемогу. Дякую вам за увагу.
Thank you so much, Bishop, for giving us this firsthand account. And now I want to turn to Pastor Beardson for his commentary and insights into the situation.
Thank you very much for invitation, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be a voice of voiceless. I was ordained in 1992 as a pastor of Protestant church in city Melitopol. It's southern part of Ukraine. For 30 years, we've been enjoying this liberty and freedom in Ukraine, and even we were Protestant church, but Ukraine was really free, democratic law of religious freedom, and we continue to grow and develop our ministry. In Melitopol, we have thousands of Protestant and tens of Protestant churches. Everything changed in 2022. Melitopol was occupied just in third, fourth day of a full-scale invasion, and we stayed in Melitopol and tried to continue our ministry. A lot of churches became humanitarian hubs, but everything what churches did in occupied territory was against Russia propaganda. It was against of this full-scale invasion goals. Just since May 2022, we've been facing of FSB agent for interrogation, and we were forced to be part of their ideological machine. As Pastor Alexander told, it was kind of talks, interrogation, threatening us to be a part of their ideological machine. And of course, a lot of pastors reject to have it, so Russian forces start to seize church, loot it, and deport all religious freedom. Our church was seized in September 2022. Just during worship service, these fully armed people, Russian soldiers, came. They blocked people, they fingerprint everybody. All ministers were led to interrogations, and after hours of the interrogation, they took our church, they banned our church, and they forced us to leave. I live in Ukraine now, and I continue to monitor situation in occupied territory. I joined Mission Eurasia as a director of Department Religious Freedom. Our church was third, which was closed in Melitopol. By summer 2023, 15 churches were closed in Melitopol, and hundreds of them in all occupied territory, Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea. And since then, I tried to check all these crimes against religious freedom, against religious leader, and I want to share some information. For that, I download to chat couple our latest report about religious freedom situation in occupied territory. And you can see that churches became places for filtration. All these groups which stayed in occupied territory just became a place of filtration. And if you check a Russian database, there are some churches which was already registered according to Russian law. But only one church in Melitopol still exists, and only one church building was given to Protestant to have a church. For instance, this is my church before the war. Russians took it, cut cross, and now it's Ministry of Cultural, of Religious, of Zaporozhye area. The same happened with other churches, and we documented all these cases of reaffiliated churches when they use it for their needs, like barracks, like their party points, or just like for their necessity. And last year, we make report what happened in Russia and where from this evil came from. So we make this face under crossfire report. Actually, this is survey of huge report, 150 pages of situation with religious freedom in Russia. And we understand how Russia works. They choose one church. They don't suppress religious freedom for certain group. They choose one group, Russian Orthodox Church, in order to make it like battering ram, in order to bring Russian world to occupied territory of Ukraine and to other countries. They try to force a religious leader to be puppets in their ideology. And when people reject it, they just kill it. I checked all these stories in my book of Remembrance of War, and describing stories of those who was tortured to death, who was killed on checkpoints, who dead just because of missiles of that. And this is part of their policy, just to force people, just to weaponize religious and to use especially Russia Orthodox Church as a part of their ideological machine. So for me, it's clear why Ukraine tried to protect itself, not suppressing orthodoxy as somebody can hear, but suppressing, just protecting themselves from those who brought Russia world to Ukrainian territory. And for me, it's clear who brought this Russia world to our city and who helped Russian soldiers to provide all these bad things in occupied territory. Also, I understand that some church leaders are still under arrest and accused. Just for tomorrow, I prepare documentation about 3 religious leaders who was sentenced to 15 or 20 years by terrorism, accusing terrorism. And we try to take them back, to have them back from Russia prison. And this work is really difficult because they are accusing being a terrorist. For us, it's not new because I still remember Soviet Union time. Our relatives were accused being a terrorist and German spy before Second World War. Now they are accused being American spy. And the same accusation Russia used in order to provide their policy. So I just want to encourage you, be very accurate in hearing facts and stories and some news about Ukraine, especially in this so touchy theme, let's say, as a religious freedom. We really invite you to visit Ukraine, and it's not so dangerous just to enter Ukraine and to visit some places in order to see the situation with religious freedom and hear people's story about occupied territory and Ukraine-controlled territory. I thank you very much for this invitation and for possibility to say my story and to show what we are doing here. We hope that truth will set a lot of people free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor, and both to you and the bishop and all your congregations. You know, part of having this webinar is hopefully to encourage you that you're not forgotten, that there are people that care, there are people that are concerned. So thank you for helping us know better about your situation and the extreme challenges you're facing, challenges that we, thank God, here in America haven't faced, but our brothers and sisters over there and people of other faiths are experiencing. So thank you for helping us appreciate that. Now we've only got about 10 minutes or so left, but I'm going to turn the question and answer portion over to my colleague, Emily Cole, who's the Director of Research and Partnerships at the Everett Center.
Hello, everyone. This is a reminder that you can put questions in the Q&A box. I don't see any for now, so I'd like to ask our audience if anyone would like to ask a question to our panelists. You can go ahead and raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
While Emily waits for questions, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew the most recent report that Reverend Britson referenced from Mission Eurasia is in the chat. I encourage you all to see that. He is also in A Faith Under Siege. He has been an incredible partner. And I would just personally ask that you pray for him as well and his family and flock. But he does wonderful work, so I encourage you to check out that report.
And I would just ask a question of the two pastors. What are like specific ways people can pray for what's going on in Ukraine, and what are ways people can advocate? To Pastor Babachuk or Pastor Bierson.
Олександр, відповідайте, я потім скажу.
Я думаю, що найважливіше сьогодні для пасторів, які залишаються в служінні, це мати стійкість, бути готовими до продовження свого служіння, до захисту церкви. І в цьому є велика потреба, тому що моральні, емоційні сили, вони інколи обмежені. Тому це така духовна нужда, потреба. Безумовно, говорити про ті речі, про які ми сьогодні вже озвучили, що російська ідеологія, вона преслідує тільки для однієї свободу, тільки для однієї церкви. І решта віросповідань, вони терплять обмеження або звинувачення в речах, до яких точно не мають ніякого відношення, типа шпіонства або праця на якусь зовнішню розвідку. Нібито священники чи пастори працюють під прикриттям, а на самом ділі це нібито розвідка. Це такі, приходилось слухати неодноразово звинувачення. Мені прямо казали, що ви співробітник відповідних служб, але прикриваєтесь тільки пастирством. Тому ми про ці речі говоримо і хотіли б мати підтримку.
I thank you, first of all American citizens, and especially American Christian, for accepting a lot of refugees from Ukraine. And we really thank you that somebody chose US as a second home, and you're a very hospitable nation. So thank you very much, especially for churches. I know how much you did for all these years. What to pray for? To pray for minister who is in Ukraine-controlled territory, and of course for those who in occupied territory. You see, the wartime is time of big challenges. For instance, 400 members of my church left Melitopol, and now they are in 16 countries. I'm still their pastor, and I never learned how to be pastor when your flock's in 16 countries. So pray for new decision pastors of Ukraine need to make now. And the worst situation, I couldn't ask anybody, because nobody can in such situation when you don't have a building, but you have a church. And a lot of new situation, for instance, our unity during the war, all confessions, we never have such unity. Yesterday, I visited this huge meeting in Lavra where President Zelensky provided his understanding, and a lot of pastors, all denominations, Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic, we need to find how to use it. So please pray for us for decision from God in this situation. And I also like you to pray for your churches in order not to be defeated, because there is no missiles and bombs in Ukraine, in America, but there is Russian lie in Ukraine, and it can kill people. So please, for your churches, your folks, in order not to be defeated. I have some special request for you, and I am now in the middle of the project how to help Americans better understand Ukrainians. And if somebody wants to help me, just in Q&A team, please contact me and we'll pray together about this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to give Lauren Homer a chance to ask her question. Lauren, you had your hand raised.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I guess I know everybody, but Alexander quite well. I appreciate being able to ask a question. My question is primarily addressed to Dmytro Volk, although I think some of the others might want to address it, which is, as I understand it, the basic rationale for the effort to shut down the legal entity of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, is for national security reasons, which is permitted by international law. And it's because there are many documented examples of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church participating in anti-state activities, such as directing bombing attacks by Russian warplanes, storing arms, etc. And the church has been given the opportunity to clearly divest itself of legal affiliation with the Moscow Patriarchate. In contrast, in Russia, no religious organizations can be controlled by foreign religious organizations. So what Ukraine is doing is pretty narrow, and it hasn't done anything yet, even though it's been discussed pretty much since the war started.
Well, first of all, I would probably try to challenge the basic premise that the basic rationale is a prohibition based on national security. This is not what the government claims anymore, right? The main rationale that the government claims now is that the Russian Orthodox Church supports Putin, has endorsed Putin aggression, and this is true. And that's why it's just immoral and impossible to be in ecclesiastical connection with the Russian Orthodox Church. This is the main argument, not national security concern. So it's a national security, but in a very broad meaning, as a sort of spiritual security, that we must protect our spirituality from Russia, which means that we must regulate ecclesiastical connections, not just what people did, but also what people believe or what people would like to consider as their religious identity. This is first moment. The second moment, that the international law, to the best of my knowledge, does not permit limitations of religious freedom based on national security. You might know that Article 18 does not contain the reference to national security. Article 9 of the European Convention of Human Rights does not contain the reference to national security. Yes, the government can ban religious organizations as any other association based on national security, but for reasons that are not related to religion. What the Ukrainian government claims is that we would like to ban you for your ecclesiastical connection, which is the reference of religion. So no, Article 18 does not permit limitations like that. And the third point, yes, we can consider this case through the framework of national security, and we can think what we can use as an evidence to support this. So far, to the best of my knowledge, despite the quite extensive investigation that we have in Ukraine since at least 2022, we have about 50 verdicts against people, priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, 50. 10 of them, I emphasize 10 of them, relates to what can be called national security crimes, such as treason, such as sharing information with the Russian military, collaboration with the Russian occupation administration, and so on and so forth. These are all serious crimes, and definitely people must be prosecuted and punished for them and go to jail if there is enough evidence, and so on. But is this 10 court verdicts enough to ban a religious organization of 8,000 priests and 10,000 communities, 8,000 communities and 10,000 priests? It's quite an interesting question. How many journalists were convicted in Ukraine? How many deputies of the local councils were convicted? How many law enforcement people were convicted? And on and on and on. This is not to say that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a sort of victim of this, and this is just a bunch of good guys that are being oppressed by the Ukrainian government. The church probably did a lot of mistakes. For example, the church should have been significantly louder in condemning the Russian aggression and, for example, prosecuting priests that collaborated with the Russian. But when it comes to law, not politics, or not to moral assessment, not theological assessment, Everything what the government has shown so far is, as I said, 50 court verdicts, and 10 of them, 40 of them are just religious hatred, and 10 of them relates to treason and this sort of crimes. In my view, it's not enough for the ban of the church normatively. In my view, it's strategical mistake to promote this sort of things, because what Ukraine does need is to do everything that will stop the war and not to give Russia any sort of pass than to share all this nonsense about persecutions of Christians around the world. So the government, if the government even wanted to separate Ukrainian religious life fully from Russia, I think it's a good time to do this is after the war, not right now. So it's not just normatively problematic, it's also in my view strategically wrong. And if you try to think about examples when invoking religious arguments to the conflict actually can mitigate the conflict, you will probably find not so many. So people who do religion and violence, they usually recommend not to invoke religious arguments, but to ignore them and to do what the government should do, prosecute people involved in criminal activities. If you are involved in treason, you must go to jail. If your community, I don't know, share the information with the Russian military, your community can be liquidated. But when the government start deciding, well, this is ecclesiastical view, it must be separated, and it's not enough to say what you said. You should say something different. It's just ineffective.
I would just add, before I turn it over to Emily to close, because we're at our maximum time. I'm deeply sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause, and I'm for Ukraine in this conflict. And I think this is a case where the challenges of dealing with these Russian Orthodox Church aligned parishes and priests is an incredibly difficult one that requires a scalpel, not a hammer. And I would just encourage the Ukrainian government to ask its friends for help in how do you sort through this. There's the OSCE panel of experts, there's the Council of Europe's Venice Commission, there's just bilateral expertise that governments like the United States or the United Kingdom or Germany could provide, because I think the concerns that Dmytro has raised are real, but also acknowledging, as he did, there are some really unique challenges with this church that has affiliations with the aggressor state and infiltration and abuse. So finding the right way to address this real concern, I think, is crucial. And we all want to help Ukraine do this in the right way. So I would just add that contribution and turn it back to Emily.
Knox, if I can just add to that, completely agree as well that we need a scalpel, not a hammer. I would also just encourage those of us who are inclined to pray that this is about the leadership of that church, not the believers and the followers there. And so separating the two is very important as well.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of our panelists and to our attendees for listening in this important conversation. I want to remind everyone, I've placed in the chat our center's webpage. The Everett Center will continue to host discussions, conversations on topics like this, and we hope to continue to provide a platform to your voices and to others on these important issues of religious freedom around the world. Many of you have asked for some materials. We will be sending out those following the webinar, and you can continue to follow up with many of our speakers from there. So with that, again, on behalf of the Everett Center for Global Religious Freedom, thank you for tuning in today, and we wish you all well.